Testing 1, 2, 3. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to see us. This is the first time in a long time that the Blizzard Sound Department's given a talk at GDC, and we feel very privileged and honored to be here. So thank you all for joining us. Appreciate it. So we're going to talk to you about the sound, in particular, the music of the Diablo franchise. We're going to touch on actually the history and bring you up as quickly as we can to Reaper of Souls, which is the most recent release, and then break down the process that we went through on Reaper of Souls and how it differed from Diablo 3 vanilla, we sometimes call it, and where we can, where that differed from the first incarnations of the Diablo series, although that's hard because only one of our team was around back then. So, but we will do our best, plus give a good shout out to those folks. So, what I'd like to do is introduce you, if you are familiar with our world of Diablo and Sanctuary, you know what the Nephilim are. We have a special group of us up here for you today. So, first of all, myself, Russell Brower. I'm the Senior Director of Audio, one of the composers for Blizzard. I'd like to also bring to the stage Derek Duke, who is the Project Music Director for Reaper of Souls. Also, Joseph Lawrence, who is the sound supervisor for the entire franchise, and also worked here back on Diablo 2. And finally, please welcome Neal Acree, a composer who's worked on many of our cinematics and did some work on Diablo 3, both incarnations of Diablo 3. Welcome. So just to set the tone, could we lower the lights a bit? We want to show you the opening cinematic of Reaper of Souls and give a real special shout out to our brothers and sisters in our cinematics department. All our visuals are done in-house, as is all our sound and music. So everything you see, the incredible sound design, the voiceover, it's all orchestrated, if you will, by all of us and all of our amazing, talented colleagues. So please enjoy.
Diablo was defeated. For a time it seemed we would know peace, but it was not to be. For Diablo's essence lingers in the Black Soul Stone. I cannot destroy the stone, nor allow its evil to remain within the heavens. And so it must be hidden, even from the angels. I pray that it will be enough. You have done well, Horadrim. Your service here is finished, and you should all run. Malthael. Why? The Nephilim will stop you. No one can stop death.
And there you have it, a little light. Our sound designer, Paul Minichini, is out in the audience. How many tracks, Paul, of sound effects? How many? Less than 1,000? Oh, that's, okay, never mind. That's not very impressive. I'm kidding. Anyway, thousands and thousands of effects, all custom. The voiceover, all cast. I mean, these are SAG-AFTRA actors. 16,000 lines of dialogue or so. I know that's not a lot in some games, but for a for a Blizzard RPG, that's quite a bit. Just to show you how we got here. I'm sure you've all heard of Diablo. You probably played it for a long time. The original Diablo came into the world in December of '96. As we all know, it was a big success. And it really struck us on a lot of levels. I can say for myself, since I've been working at Blizzard for nearly 10 years, this was the first Blizzard game I played, and of course I was still a civilian then, and I was struck by, well, it was awesome, and the music especially. It was iconic, it was unexpected, and it just worked. It's not what I would have thought of, and more on that later. It really endures. There was a follow-up with Diablo 2, an epic follow-up. And that came, people had to wait a few years, in 2000. But Lord of Destruction, thankfully, not quite such a wait. Well, another year, about. And Joseph, you worked on starting with Lord of Destruction?
No, actually D2 was, I was a contractor on D2, the original.
Okay. Worked on mine.
What thought I did?
So we didn't want to have people wait too long for the next installment. So a mere 7 years and 1 day later, did we bring it to the world? No. We announced it. But how do we announce such an epic event? Picture the venue. We're in Paris at one of our worldwide invitationals. This is esports. In earlier days of esports, thousands and thousands of people there, and we could have done it with speeches and videos and all of that, and that stuff came later. But happily, the way we did it was we used iconic music. Again, this music in the game was so special. So we brought the stage lights down black, then we brought them up red. And a good friend of ours, Lawrence Juber, formerly of Paul McCartney and Wings, he came up with a 12-string guitar and a digital delay. The first chord and the roof came off the plate. And by the time he got this far, it was pandemonium. And I think this is really special because, we've arrived in an era where the music in video games has come such a long way that 2 chords and everyone knew what was coming. Now, we decided to go even further. We brought up a full orchestra and did this whole big to-do to announce it. We even had fire dancers because, gotta have fire dancers. Well, so with that in mind, we've announced it. Now what happens next? Well, we didn't want to have them wait too long. But 4 years later, actually, May of 2012 to be exact, we have Diablo 3. It's a huge success for us. We partied hard. Most of that was not ingested. Most of that wound up all over each other. If you have been at Blizzard for any length of time, you know to bring a change of clothes that day. I'd like to just have a little shout out now for the original sound team. Matt Ullman is the creator of the music from the original Diablo series. He's really came up, as I mentioned earlier, with something very special. So, and as we talk, you'll see we wanted to pay some homage to that. Then if we move forward in time, Derek Duke, sitting right here, and Jason Hayes joined the Blizzard team and worked on the cinematics of the day. Joseph Lawrence then joined, as he mentioned, around Diablo 2 time. And then I came along, like I said, 10 years ago in June. So now we find ourselves with Diablo 3, and we want to figure out, this is a new game, this is a new story, or a continuation of a story. You know, where do we go with this music? And we started by looking toward what would Matt Ullman do? And it turns out he had been experimenting not only with the stuff most people remember, the 12-string guitars, the loops, the percussion, all the wonderful pastiche of found sound and things like that. He was also starting to experiment with orchestras, especially like Wagnerian-style orchestras. So he had gone to Bratislava at least twice and done sessions there. And he wrote some beginning music for Diablo 3 in its early days. And so we kind of picked up the ball from there. And that's when we came up with the idea that since we're telling one of the oldest stories ever, you know, the epic battle between good and evil, why don't we record in probably one of the oldest style venues possible? And other than outdoors around a campfire, probably the oldest way of listening to music is in a big concert hall. So we decided to go big, and we went to what's known as the Segerstrom Hall in the Performing Arts Center in Costa Mesa, Southern California, and we worked with the Pacific Symphony. And that was about an 87-piece orchestra. We also made a couple of creative decisions back then. Diablo 3 Vanilla was pretty much about a final showdown between the heavens and the seven hells, and things are so messed up in this world of Sanctuary now that Diablo can pretty much, while the angels and the demons are infighting, and the humans or Nephilim are all unwitting pawns in this whole thing, Diablo can kind of just waltz into the side door of heaven and start kicking fruit stands over and things like that. So choir became a very important thing. And so just to let you know, in Diablo 3 Vanilla, we came up with a decision to represent the heavens and the hells with different choirs. So we went to Dublin, and we recorded a recording choir performing in a recording choir named Anuna. They sing with a Gaelic accent, which is different than what we had been hearing with a lot of the Latin or faux Latin kind of stuff, or American singers with that accent, if you will. I know it's subtle, but I just wanted a different sound. So I heard Anuna, and they did all these things with harmonics and stuff like that, with their, not tube and throat singing, but strange things with their tongues. I don't know how they do it. It was bizarre, but beautiful, and a gorgeous, haunting sound, and we wrote for that. And then we found another choir, and that was the London Voices. And it was mostly male, and that would give us the testosterone sound. So, heaven and hell. But we did a switch around and decided we'd make the hell choir the beautiful Anuna choir, the seductive, come play with me, Danny, that sound. And then for heaven, because again, heaven's like, there's a little too much testosterone in heaven at this point in the story, and as I said, things are allowing to go really bad. So we went with the unexpected, and had the mostly male London Voices group do the choir sound. So that's just a real basic history lesson on how we got through the vanilla D3 release. And that brings us to Reaper of Souls. So I want to break it down. I want to bring these guys into it. We'll kind of go step by step here. Derek, given where we had been before, there was a concepting phase. There was a time period where, you're deciding what you're going to do, why things might or might not evolve. What was on your mind?
Well, before starting Reaper of Souls, I think it's important to understand the headspace of the team. And that's, Diablo 3, as any game that Blizzard does is, at least a success in its own right, because Blizzard, has a certain amount of traction in the market. There were certain things that Blizzard maybe didn't get as right as we wanted to. And so the team really wanted to do something even better with Reaper of Souls. They wanted to get back to Diablo's dark roots. They had some really specific things in mind to really achieve with Reaper. So that was really at the forefront of the team's mind just from the get-go. So that was really, coming in to the project at the beginning. I think that was, I just wanted to put that out there, that was right at the start. So now the construction.
So concept art.
So concepting from the beginning, taking that, starting with the designers and talking about that that darkness and that gothicness, that vibe where everything is dark, hellacious, West March, where everything, that whole sort of that, maybe don't see it here as much, but that sort of that blue-gray that's really a part of the Reaper art style that Christian had, where everything just really is so different than any of the color palette that was there in D3 in that Act 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then finding a way to express that in the music. So from the earliest times of just sitting at the piano, finding ways to express that musically, where it's not gonna come out in ways that are ways to be disturbing that won't just make you cringe and turn something off, but be able to sustain some sort of disturbing vibe.
Were you thinking, we'll get into planning and stuff later, but even before you started composing, were you thinking about how it would be recorded and what might be different, since we had done this big extravaganza the first time?
Well, yeah, sonically, I mean, there's that whole continuity thing. I mean, you had done that thing in the big concert hall, so yeah, thinking about sonically continuing that, I really like that classical sound. I started to talk to John Kurlander, the engineer who had worked with Russell and works on a lot of our games, and I had talked to him early on, like, hey, I've been listening to a lot of these recordings, and when you have the choir in the same room with the orchestra, it sounds so different than when you do them separately. Wouldn't it be awesome if we could do that together? And it's like, we don't really do that.
And I was recording the Beatles, we never did that.
Yeah. So that was something that I'd really wanted to do, and so it took a while to push through to do that, but that was something that we were able to do, and it was pretty amazing to be able to do that.
So we've got some photos, and we'll get into some more specifics about that. I didn't mean to jump the gun there, but the composition process, you worked fairly solitary for a while. A lot of alternative control. Derek is famous for having the best toys.
So, well, I do work solitary. Like I do, I wanted to. And this is true of all the projects that I work on at Blizzard. I do like to involve everybody. So it was important to me with Reaper to involve Joseph and Russell and Glenn and Jason, but I really wanted it to have a singular sound. So while with Vanilla, everybody kind of did their own music, and we brought it all together and we put it in the game like we do for many of the franchises. I wanted to go back to where, back in D1, D2, it was one guy doing all the music, putting it in. So I basically, I had some meetings with these guys explaining what I wanted them to do, the ideas, the music themes I wanted them to come up with. Then I took their music and then I arranged it. I orchestrated it and then found a way to put it in. So while I was using their melodies and their ideas, sort of filtering it all through one voice, giving it so the game as a whole, the Reaper game, had just a more singular vibe. So it was just a more cohesive musical vision or musical sound. So it just had that sort of musical cohesion. That was the goal there.
So you invited each of us to submit a little something, and I feel terrible about these speaker icons. I promise to do better next time. But each of us submitted something. Like this was me just sitting at my piano. And I think I sent you 3 things. And by the time we were done, and we were in the studio, and the music had gone from our sketches, and then through Derek's brain, and then onto paper, and then through these amazing live players. This is, in fact, the piece he chose, more so than the others. But you still won't recognize it. In fact, we couldn't exactly find it, but after it had been through Derek's process, you get things like this.
Yeah, you end up with something that I would harmonize in just a totally different way, and where the orchestration might lead into something totally different. So those 3 things ultimately ended up into just like an 8-minute piece. Yeah.
And when you all were walking in, we were just playing the soundtrack to the game. We heard some of the building big chords and stuff. That was a different type of writing. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Sure. So we were doing. So there's a lot of the regular standard sort of music, but there was a lot of sort of extended aleatoric music that I did. Wasn't necessarily 100% random, and it wasn't 100% atonal, but using sort of block notation where the players were given musical figures, and they were given these things where they were allowed to make choices of what to play within a specific framework, and they have a free sort of time set and conductor's mark, so they might have a dynamic shape, and they would start quietly and begin playing their things at just various rhythms, and begin building and building and building to a crescendo, and the conductor's raising the dynamic markings like this, and then she cues to the next, and then that's when they would shift to something else. And then they begin playing like that, and then she shifts to the next mark, and so it's all very mapped out. All the things are there for them to play. It's not 100% random, but it is according to a specific set of rules, and it's shaped out. But it gives you a bunch of sort of predetermined textures, and it also just generates a bunch of really wonderful, beautiful textures, and each take just gives you just wonderful, marvelous results.
And sometimes you might tell them, go no lower than this note, or go to the bottom of your range, or go to the top of your range. Some of the scores looked a lot like this wispy black smoke on the screen here, but the conductor would keep them together. Now all this, whether it was the standard the scoring approach of composition, I'm pencil and paper in front of a piano. That's my way, so enough said about that, kind of old school. Derek, do you write sequencers mainly, or how do you?
I do all of the above. So one of the approaches I did in D3 for Reaper was I did quite a bit of some of the compositions were based off of text. So even though they were instrumental compositions, I based them off of sort of ancient texts. So sort of similar to how ancient composers or older composers base their compositions off of sacred texts.
Dead composer.
Yes, dead composers. However you want to think about it. So a lot of the instrumentals are based on sacred text, although they are not choral works. I thought that was just sort of like making up finding the lyrics from, say, extrapolating them from the Book of Cain or some of our other lore that we have internal to the company, then taking that, using that to base the music on, and then using that as the basis for their compositions. I mean, just finding all that stuff is just so incredibly inspiring. So whether it's that or, just, using all my fun toys and whatever works.
When you see some of the visuals that we get and the concept art, and then the novels, Derek mentioned the Book of Cain, and there's all these things that we can immerse ourselves in, so we're quite fortunate. It's pretty easy to get in that creative space. But of course, there's planning. We have an obligatory photo here. This is our amazing conductor on the left, Ms. Emer Noon, also, I think, our collective conducting teacher. And she conducts most of our large format recordings. And you guys spent several days just poring over the scores and figuring out what order to record things in, and also with John Kurlander there. Just if any of you don't know John Kurlander, when he was about 17 years old, he decided to walk down the street. He grew up near Abbey Road Studios, and he got a job there, and Beatles were recording Abbey Road, and so he was making coffee and being a tape op and all sorts of things, and so over the next many years he learned how to be an amazing recording engineer, was head engineer there for many years, so he had a lot of insight to give us on the planning. In fact, since we're getting into the recording area, how did you said you mentioned the choir in the same room with the orchestra to him. He initially was not so much?
That was he's always, he loves ideas because that just gives him something to think about, and then, and then he comes up, that's because he always figures out a way to do everything that you want. But, so that was initially, but, it was his idea. So we had, the first session we had was without the choir, but it was his idea to do the recording in the classical music setup. So for Reaper of Souls, we didn't use the traditional symmetrical film type of setup with the matching strings. We did it with the classical setup of the orchestra.
Yeah.
And that was after looking at after we actually got the score books for the first session and looking at the actual score, because John's someone who actually understands the way the music looks on the paper. And having recorded classical music for years and years and years and years and years before getting into film, he said, this looks like classical music, we should do it that way.
Yeah. These photos are actually from the Vanilla D3 recording at Segerstrom Hall. So this shows, the scale of this giant room. There's John Kurlander with, as Derek was referring to, the more film style thing with the first violins on conductor's left and second violins on conductor's right, which is decidedly not classical. That gives you the scale of the room. We wanted a room with a lot of air. And yes, I played the pipe organ, and it's in the soundtrack. I could not resist. But going to Reaper of Souls, here we are. And actually, here's a broad view. The choir's a little hard to see because they're not standing at this point, but they're on the sides in the pews. And I think we ended up moving them a little closer in, didn't we?
Yeah. So it's a double choir of 8 and 8 on either side.
So in this chapel up in Seattle, we still got that old sound. It's not as big of a room, but it really complemented the style of music that Derek selected quite well. You had some crazy issues with even cell phones on buzz being audible in the recording. So
there's somebody in that one.
Yeah. And just because we love her to death, this is Emer doing one of those big aleatoric moments. This is the attitude that's required. I don't know how much there is to say about mixing. Was there anything unusual about the mixing process?
I know, is this where you want to mention about Joseph's?
Well, next we can get into implementation as well. So, Joseph, where were you? Go ahead and prompt because
Derek did most of the implementation.
Right. I just meant Joseph and I spent a good amount of time doing a bunch of post-processing after the fact with the when we got the orchestra music back and doing a bunch of the crazy. Did we pass those pictures?
Oh yeah, I'm just gonna.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. Yeah, so we spent a good amount of time, and Joseph collects toys too, definitely. But doing a lot of the post-processing, because we process the orchestra too in strange reverbs. My favorite way to process the orchestra for Reaper of Souls is to actually use a vowel filter into the reverb, so you get sort of the ghost choir going on all the instruments. But we also do the bowed guitar, bowed cymbals, all sorts of different things, using matrix mixers and for feedback and just every other thing. But
well, my approach is pretty similar to Derek's, but I kind of focus a bit more on found sound. I'm really, since I have a background as a sound designer, I tend to like to use a lot of strange noise and field recordings. Even stuff that was meant for sound effects can become a piece of music somehow. It happens all the time. I really like to make source sessions that could go on for 2 or 3 hours, literally, with maybe 12 or 16 layers. And some of those I made decades ago, and I'm still mining them for really cool pieces of music to slap into something. So, yeah, bowing stuff. I'll bow just about anything. If it has enough rosin on it, it'll make a noise. And we typically, I also will do the sample sequencer thing, of course, but I really love the idea of taking really unique noise and applying that into a more traditional and orthodox piece of music and having a hybrid approach. That's something that is really interesting to me.
You've slayed a lot of monsters in those deepest, darkest dungeons to Joseph's work. So, Neal, as long as, before we get into a little more on implementation, please, you joined us to do some cinematics, and you basically on both games, Neal bailed us out. We had bitten off more than we could chew, and so when you do that, you surround yourself with the best, and good stuff happens. So, Neal, how is the cinematic writing been very good to you?
It's been great. It's always a real pleasure to work on such amazing cinematics that the best in the industry. And you know, what was fun on this one is, you know, I came in late enough in the process that Derek already had an established score with some orchestral music already recorded, and I had a lot of material to look at to try to find a way. You know, we're talking about continuity, trying to make it sound like it was all part of the same score, like, you know, like it had come through Derek's voice in a sense. And Derek had already done the intro cinematic, which had a you know, a thread like this kind of 16th note violin thread that happened all the way through. There was kind of this momentum to it, and I ended up doing the end cinematic, and I thought we could do like a bookend kind of thing. And when I first saw it, there was a temp score in the cinematic, as there usually is. And you know, the challenge, of course, is to, you know, how do I do something that creates the same mood, but do it my own way without, you know, you don't want to rip off the temp score, but it's also like it is very specific at times, and the directors use it as a tool to edit to, you know, from storyboards all the way to the final version. So there's a certain amount of attachment to it. So I tried to take what was there and incorporate some of, you know, Derek's motifs into it, as well as bring a little bit of my own voice to it. And ultimately, I think it made a nice, you know, bookend, and it was great to be able to work with the existing material like that.
There's a common theme with Blizzard music, and that is all of our franchises that you are familiar with the exception of Overwatch, they have their roots going back many years. I mean, Diablo just celebrated 15 years, I believe, of existence in this world, and that meant it's the same way with World of Warcraft. We're part of our job as composers is to look for the opportunities, of course, to add our own voice, but more importantly, how to keep that continuum going. And so that's one reason we love working with Neal. He's not on staff, but we can still bring him in and know that he will have done his homework and draw upon the themes. And that's a really important thing. Any of you looking to be composers, be prepared to, you know, if you get fortunate enough to join a team, don't feel like you got to put your thumbprint all over it, especially if it's established. You're going to be a big hero if you can, you know, amplify, be a force multiplier for, you know, the work that's already being done. I feel like the pig in Toy Story. I mean, hair through here. And so implementation, whether or not Derek did it all, we owe a lot to Joseph here. There's a tool, and it's. I hate to show you this proprietary screen. Okay, you've seen enough. Are you going to see it again? Okay, there you go. It's called Axe, and I don't think that means anything, does it?
Not as far as I've been able to
It's a thing to injure people with. So, in general, what can the Diablo music engine do, and how did that affect both composition and what was implementation like?
Yeah, I mean, we did most. I did the sound effects implementation, and Derek did most of the music implementation. So Derek did that.
Okay, I mean, at its simplest, this is a sound snow, not a music snow. The music snow is just a basic playlist editor that defaults to random. You can play in order or play in random. You can choose to override ducking if necessary, so it'll play full loudness, you know, so dialogue won't cause it to duck. You can have up to 2 other sounds play on top of it, so if you want some sort of to play over the top randomly during random periods over the top of your playlist, you can do that. Things like during the desert in Act 2, when there's sort of drony things going and suddenly you get some little random beats that would come in, like those were actually just random periodic rhythms that would come in this sort of random period sounds. But other than that, it's not a very robust system. The playlists have they have crossfades to start, and it's a min-max setting, so you can actually, if you have a if your music file is like 9 minutes long, you can set the start time to as long or as short as you want. So it could randomly start, from 2 seconds to like 5 minutes. So it's going to start anywhere in that range. So you can actually have a huge amount of variety. But like I said, it's not super robust in terms of interactive.
But some simple tricks, almost sleight of ear, if you will, makes it seem like there's more music in the game.
Right. Again,
than there
like
is.
especially, you could play through Diablo many, many times and not hear a lot of the music.
That part of it was kind of derived from what we had in the ambient sound effects system, where we have a stereo ambience playing in the world all the time, and we have one-shots playing over the top of that, and it was a very similar idea for the music that worked really, really well.
It's also important to note, this tool had been in development as long as Diablo 3 had been in development, if not longer. And Diablo 3 had been in development since I started working at Blizzard 10 years ago. So this was before WIs or any of this kind of thing. So this is definitely a homegrown tool. Fmod, without the designer part, is under the hood somewhere, probably an older version of it. But actually, this was a pretty advanced tool for its day, but it is now showing its age. And whatever Blizzard does next, hopefully we're going to have some cooler tech under the hood.
It was very, very simple, but like the Millennium Falcon, it had it where it counted.
Very, very well said. I just happen to have a picture, Derek working on the cinematics. That goes back to pretty traditional scoring techniques, working against picture. Unfortunately, there's something left to the imagination in the visuals at that point in time.
Yeah.
A lot of missing scenes, a lot of stuff like that. So we really rely on the communication with the cinematics group to get things right. You mentioned temp scores. I just can't help it. It's the bane of my existence. How many of you love temp scores? Raise them up. Nobody. Okay. They are necessary, and it's definitely an art to learn how to not rewrite Inception and Man of Steel and Transformers over and Oblivion over and over again. So with that, I mean all these things have come together to make these two incarnations of Diablo 3, and we would like to hear from you. We have time to open this up to a Q&A so we could get more specific. And do we have a microphone for folks? There is one. So please feel free to step up and ask us anything you'd like.
Hi.
Hello.
Great talk. Thank you very much. So those of us who have worked with animators know that there can be a very common thread of added or dropped time code. And you mentioned the importance of communication with the cinematics team, the visual team. On a Blizzard cinematic where there are such high frame rates and such incredible depth of detail, how many more, what additional layers of information do you make sure you cover in the communication back and forth with that team to make sure that you're not suddenly having to rewrite something that's 2 seconds shorter or 5 seconds longer or whatever it may be?
Producer.
Yeah, you have a top-notch producer like that one sitting in the audience right there.
Would Caroline Hernandez please stand? Stand up.
Yeah.
Raise your hand. The production, what's the word? The production philosophy at Blizzard is very, very much instilled in what we do. We're full of creatives. If you've ever taken a disc course, we're mostly all high C's, and we need each other. Producers, we need producers, and of course, they lament about needing us, but together we create awesome stuff. And but to be more specific to that, I mean, you I think have probably done more cinematics than the rest of us. So.
Well, yeah, people like Caroline Hernandez and the cinematics team at Blizzard do a great job at making, if there's an update to the video, then, we'll know that there's a couple frames missing or something. I start out in independent films and low budget films where there's a lot of horror stories about like the day before the dub getting a reel and it being completely different than I thought it was. But with Blizzard that never happens. It's always very straightforward and you know what to expect. And even if there are last minute changes, you know they're coming and they make it easy to address those.
What's your DAW you work in?
I use Logic.
Okay. So I don't use Logic as much, but I will say, like, for Pro Tools users, when you get a video, if you're a composer and you get a video, first thing to do is make sure the frame rates match. That's the thing that will bite you faster than anything. If you match the frame rates, then you're in pretty good shape. The other thing is, and this is where Caroline helps us a lot, we standardize the deliveries from cinematics. Even though the technology is like 80 years old, we still use 2 pops. There's nothing that will save your bacon more often than if there's no other way to line something back up again in time, the 2 pops there. And of course, with a DAW, you can zoom in and get it down tighter than any of our ancestors ever did. So yeah, frame rate, the standardization for us, it's like there's about 20 seconds a pre-roll before the hour, and it always starts on the hour. Beat me up if I'm getting any of this wrong. There's a 2-pop. And enough post-roll, because some DAWs don't like negative numbers, and it's just, yeah. We've all learned the hard way, and for those of us who have been around long enough to have worked with film or tape, we're very conservative about that sort of thing. So.
Terrific. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Yes.
Hi, guys. Thanks so much for the talk. So I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on, you talked about how you were writing themes on the piano and kind of passing them over to you to sort of develop into a more fleshed out piece. I was wondering, how much of that was going on? Was it more like people were assigned to cues for the most part, or was there a lot of sort of symbiotic and cross-fertilization going on between composers to create the music?
Not as much, just because time didn't permit. So there was that much from Russell. I think 2 pieces from Glenn, 1 piece from Jason, 1 piece from Joseph, and then he helped out a bunch and Joseph helped me a bunch with the processing. But everybody's involved in a lot of other projects. Like Russell does a lot with WoW, and then I think Glenn and Jason were also doing a lot with Void at the time. So it's kind of what everybody's doing, and I was focusing obviously heavy on Reaper, so it's kind of what we all have time to doing. So it's like getting what I could from them, and then me having to focus on doing this in order to get the job done, kind of thing.
The symbiotic approach, I think, was taken more on the first one. If that's the right word, where we
Is that what it's talking? Yeah.
the approach where we were all writing and we were all either doing our own orchestration or had an orchestrator, and in that kind of situation, I think we just have gotten to the point where we know each other musically pretty well because we've all been writing together for a long time now, and we were also paying some homage to Diablos 1 and 2 and 2X. With what Matt Ullman had started. So that, again, it's a good tip as a composer, leave your musical ego at the door and realize you're on a really fun freight train and get on it and come up with ways of reinterpreting this stuff. Because remember, to the audience, it's Diablo, it's Blizzard. It's not Russell or Derek or Jason or Neal or anyone. It's a franchise. So that's the important thing. On WoW, we do concept music phase things sometimes, where all the composers each write what they want to against some concept art, and we play it for each other and kind of trade ideas, and that begins the process of getting to know each other.
So it sounds like trust is a big thing, then. Is really
Sorry?
the answer. It sounds like trust is really the answer, I guess.
And one thing that was really cool about the way we worked in Reaper as opposed to the way we did it before, that was really at least for me, very liberating, was that none of us had to finish any songs. We didn't have to finish anything. It's like, here's some ideas, Derek. Good luck. And it was really fun as a composer to just come up with these really core ideas and let him go to town on it and not hear what it sounded like until we got to the stage and suddenly go, there it is. And that's really cool. And I love what Derek did with everybody's stuff. And it really codified the whole soundtrack into a really singular direction, yet still bringing all these different ideas into play for him to work with. It was a really fun way to work, I thought.
I'm glad no one told me that my crappy piano demo was going to be played at GDC. Anyway, thank you.
All right, thank you very much, guys.
With the maturation of commercial audio middleware like FMod Studio and Wise, is your team even considering the possibility for the next generation of development that you guys use of using a commercial package like that? Or is it pretty likely that once again you will have a custom engine of your own built on some low-level driver?
We can't say much, but we are definitely going to evolve in that direction, yes, in the future.
You mean away from the custom audio tools towards the commercial tools?
Well, there's always going to be some customization that we do. That's just going to be the reality of it. But
There's no need to reinvent the wheel, though, especially when they put all that development into a fine system. So, you know, World of Warcraft is tough because it's a living, breathing thing. It has, other than most Tuesdays for a few hours, it has never come down, right? So it's we can't break it. And Diablo is more conventional in terms of its distribution, but it's to just change sound engines would be a Herculean job, whatever how you would pronounce that. But yeah, future Derek and Joseph looking at, you know, whatever that Diablo team is going to do in the future, they're already in there championing cool middleware.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks for, I'm going to raise this up a little bit. Or actually, I'll just bend down. So you started the talk talking about, you know, what's iconic about Diablo 1 and the 12-string guitar and those few chords. Mm-hmm. For me, those things evoke, you know, everything about Diablo. And I'm kind of wondering, for Reaper of Souls, the soundtrack, when I think about it, there's nothing in particular, no singular thing that I think of and say, oh, that is Reaper of Souls. That's this part of the Diablo series. And I'm kind of wondering, was there something that you guys were going for to do that? Or was it more like, let's fit into this Diablo world and make sure that we fill that space? And I bring this up simply because one of the things that stuck out about the Matt Ullman, that one track, the Tristram track, is that it is so very, like you said in the beginning of the talk, it's so very different from what you would expect going into a normal game. But then with Diablo 3 and Reaper of Souls, we have an 87-piece orchestra, which is almost, in a way, par for the course for a giant, you know, game like this series. So is there something there where there just real subtleties that you kind of need to listen for in the mix, or was there something there that perhaps I need to go back and listen to again? Was there or a different approach on something iconic that you were going for?
So I don't think it's trying to be iconic.
Sure.
But I think it definitely is trying to get to that darkness of Diablo. So there's that darkness of texture. It's certainly about that texture. It's also about that violin. It's certainly something that you're going to get more from, that I think comes across more in the game than actually from listening to the soundtrack. And I think that's certainly something that, like, most people who get that, like, oh, that Diablo 12-string guitar is iconic for me, are all you people who played Diablo, not people who heard it on YouTube and say, oh, that 12-string guitar is, you know that, and it's iconic for you because you all played Diablo, right? So I think the Reaper soundtrack, it's something that you experience playing the game, and like that I think the solo violin might sort of react in that way, and that I think is sort of functionally trying to get at something like that. And that was sort of this this hero's journey thing, where the journey of the Nephilim in Reaper is sort of it's your choice, to do the right thing, to become a hero, to make the choice, to do these things, to make the journey in Reaper, to do the things, and so it's that soloistic version, it's that personal choice, and so at least for me, that's the symbolism in that versus the orchestral textures.
Sure.
At least that might be somehow related to something kind of iconic.
I guess it's a little bit tricky because you guys did mention about being a little bit more dynamic with the soundtrack. I think if I heard you correctly, that the way that things mix together in the game, depending on what area of the world you're in, what's happening on screen, does that variability kind of, in a way, take away from something that might be iconic, or would you need to focus on something specific like that, bringing that violin, the voice of the violin?
We paid homage to the old soundtrack as you begin Diablo 3 vanilla, and to this day, if you begin the game, you'll hear that.
Right.
But the whole team came to us and said, we want to keep moving forward. We want to expand this universe.
Sure. Okay.
Thank you. We're really short on time. Let's see if we can squeeze in these last two.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hi, with such a massive undertaking in the dialogue, how did you handle the post-process and localization? I mean, you had 28,000 lines of dialogue in Diablo 3 altogether, and how many different languages did you localize in, and how do you handle that process of designing every voice so that they all match the Blizzard Sonic brand?
I think you just gave us our GDC talk for next year. Diablo 3, I believe, held a record in its time, the vanilla, for shipping simultaneously in 13 different languages. So, that's not a short answer, but I'll tell you, it's not easy, and, sound is often kind of jammed up at the end of the process. Localization has it even worse. So, this is a continuous journey of improvement, hopefully, to have less pain. But yes, thank you. I think that's a great topic for another time.
Thank you, and congratulations, Hearthstone, best
Thank
design.
you. Laura.
Hi, Russell. I know that you wanted a particular sound out of the choirs that you chose. I was wondering, in one of the photos in the chapel, they were set up antiphonally, facing each other. Did that have any impact on the sound? Was that a choice that you made, or was it just the limitation of the chapel?
No, it just seemed the better way to get the right sound, to just split the choirs.
Mm-hmm.
There are four from each section, just to double them up like that. We tried doing 8, 8, 8, 8, and it just didn't work right, but having just too many choirs. That wasn't how I had originally intended it. We tried them actually facing directly into the orchestra.
Really?
But that didn't work either, so we tried a few different ways, with the different mics, and we just went with whatever worked. So.
Were there two conductors? You have a
we did. We had a conductor behind Emer, so that
they just watched Emer, though. Yeah, she rocked it.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we are out of time. On behalf of all of us, thank you, and we will see you in the Seven Hells. Thanks so much for coming.